Okay, evening all. We're going to resume looking at Tal in the 1958 USSR Championship with the black pieces. So last week we were looking at the white pieces, and let's have a look how he handles the black pieces. So it can be more difficult to play with the black pieces. This first game we'll look at David Bronstein, who's a fantastic player in his own right. He's got a great book, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, for those that want to read about his games. Like Tal, they both did annotation books of their own games, which is amazing that they've given us in the chess world that opportunity. So there's also like the Life and Games of Mikhail Tal, which is a brilliant book, and it's a great reference for getting some insights into these games as well. Some of these games looked at. So okay, so the game against David Bronstein, E4 from David Bronstein. And Tal responds with the Sicilian defence. And actually, you might think he always plays the Sicilian, but actually he does experiment with other things like the French defence. And we're going to have a look at a game later, hopefully, with the French defence as well. So, but I think the Sicilian generally fits in with Tal's dynamic attacking style more than perhaps the French defence. And that might be a lesson for other attacking players. Of course, nowadays there's all these anti-Sicilian systems, so one can be off-put playing the Sicilian nowadays. But this start position here, the e6, white goes for the open Sicilian. So we see c takes d4, knight takes d4. Just check, I hope the board's okay. So a6 is played here by Mikhail. So we see bishop e2. Knight attacks the pawn on e4, that's defended. Then the move queen c7. So queen c7 immediately without any knight c6. Knight b5 is ruled out by the a6. So this bishop might be coming in one move to maybe c5, or even bishop b4. But we'll see. In fact, after white castles, we just see knight c6. Bishop e3. And now bishop b4, in fact, making use of the fact black hasn't played d6, so he can do this. So it's threatening to damage white's pawn structure. David Bronstein just replies with bishop d3. And now Tal castles. He knows he's got e5 under lock and key at the moment. Another point of queen c7 to keep an eye on e5. We see queen f3. This queen might be quite dangerous in some way later. There's almost a temptation maybe to play knight e5 here, but maybe just queen g3. In fact, Tal took on d4, bishop takes d4, and now plays e5. Okay, the queen does pin that pawn, putting more pressure here. Pinning that pawn, we see d6 really threatening now to take the bishop. So the bishop moves, and offering a pawn sack as well on c3, which Tal does take up this pawn sacrifice. So bishop takes c3, queen takes c3. There's obviously some compensation for white. Is it enough? Bishop g5 threatening, well, the knight has to move somewhere. So where? In fact, it goes to h5 here. Okay, queen h4, and now a sort of counter pawn sacrifice with knight f4. It would look very dangerous to do anything else actually. If g6, well, these dark squares are just the total liability. If we did play g6, for example, then maybe actually just g4 could be possible, and bishop f6 is just too dangerous. Something like this, it just looks far too dangerous. So counter sacking a pawn here looks fairly logical. So black wants to maybe use that c file later. So we see bishop takes f4. This pawn sacrifice is accepted by David, and we see bishop e6 actually offering d6 as well. So yeah, another pawn sack. At the moment, equal on pawns here. This pawn sacrifice is accepted. So clearly, you know, players in this tournament, dynamic, aggressive players like Bronstein, Tal, and Spassky in particular, they don't mind pawn sacrifices. It's kind of part of the routine of playing chess for them. So here, what is the counterplay? b5. Black has a fine looking position, the rooks are nicely connected, there's no weaknesses in Black's pawn structure. Can Black make use of this C file and the aggressive queen? We see A3 and then actually the queen's kicked, revealing the points of A3, just to play Queen B4 here. Rook AC8, and Black enjoys a pleasant position with the rooks, but okay, technically White's a pawn up. H6, just making sure there's no back row issues coming up. F4, and now Tal takes off the queen, doesn't matter, he's a pawn down. He's got Rook D4 here, it looks good. Okay, F5, Bishop C4. There's enough pressure, it seems, for the pawn, and it looks as though a peaceful conclusion could be reached here, or is it? So Bishop takes D3, C takes, Tal gets his pawn back, and okay, you might think, oh, this is quite dangerous, these two connected passed pawns, they're not really going anywhere. Rook A1, okay, Rook D8, counter-attacking indirectly. If A6 is taken, maybe Rook takes E4, just using that pin, for example. Whoops. Rook D8, and in fact that happens. Rook takes A6, we see Rook takes E4, and it's a peaceful conclusion, peaceful draw. Okay, not the most exciting game to kick off with, but don't worry, we're just warming up. So I wanted to check out some interesting draws as well, where appropriate. I thought this was interesting. So White's initiative, well, with this Black system here, it was interesting, the exchange of pawn sacrifices. White sacrificing a pawn here, Black returning the complement, not having any kingside issues, getting another pawn sacrifice in, and getting a nice enough position to easily simplify to a peaceful conclusion. Okay, but let's get on to some meaty, exciting games now. There's not too many other draws we're going to look at tonight, so let's look at now a later round, going in round order, against Yuri Averbakh. Okay, and this is an interesting game because it seems an assessment of Averbach's style was made in the life and games of Mikhail Tal. As though Tal had been expecting Averbakh to always try for peaceful lines, even if Tal sacrificed, to try and make the position not so complex. So Tal was sort of aware, I think, of Yuri's style. He played a very aggressive, dynamic opening, the Bannik, which today is considered very risky. But actually, some IMs, I'm not sure how many GMs, but definitely, for example, Quillen in the UK, he's an IM that plays Bannik frequently. It's an aggressive weapon, and maybe people are neglecting it when they theoretically prepare because it's not expected maybe that much. But there's also this line which Kasparov created with against Nunn with F4 and Bishop B5 check, which is unpleasant and you need to know as Black nowadays, but at that time that wasn't so well established, if at all. So Bishop E2 I think was the more common move at the time, Bishop G7, and this variation of the Bannik gives Black the queenside pawn majority, E-file pressure, dark square pressure. There's sufficient sources of counterplay here, basically, with Black's assets. Queen C2 is played, knight A6, and this knight is sometimes coming to C7, but tactically it sometimes can come to B4. Doesn't matter about doubling the pawn. Black would get bishop pair, that's no big deal. White plays on Black's sensitive pawn, which is D6 here, so plays bishop F4. And actually, this actually leads to a piece sacrifice, bishop F4, in Tal's words. This is very, very interesting annotation here, very dynamic annotation from Tal of this game. Game 17 for those of you with the Life and Games of Mikhail Tal book. So bishop F4 is effectively, well, Black's having to sacrifice a piece. That's what he fought at the time. So we see knight B4, very interesting piece set coming up. Okay. So the queen has to go to b1 to keep hold of the pawn, and then this very interesting piece sacrifice, knight takes e4 is played. But so after knight takes e4, bishop f5 looks like a nasty pin on the queen. White plays knight f d2 here, and we see knight takes d5. And the surprising thing for a lot of people is Yuri just basically gave back the piece. It's like he wants to logically establish an equilibrium again. Instead of moving this bishop back to g3, which I think later was found out could be really good for white in later analysis of this game, Yuri, I think he just wanted a peaceful game without too many complications. And so he plays this move, bishop takes d6, even though he's going to be slightly worse, but he might be thinking it's going to be opposite coloured bishops and it'll be okay. So Tal doesn't mind the resulting position, of course. Knight f6. Okay, and the piece is being won back here basically. This is an overload on white's position. It's being won back by force. It's protected for the moment. So knight takes e4, and now bishop takes e4, winning back the piece. Well, it was basically counter-sacked from the opponent. So white is just a pawn down. With opposite colour bishops, he might have thought, well, maybe there's some chances of a draw. Can Tal really grind this? Well, let's see. So queen c2, rook e7. It looks very comfortable for black, but it's opposite coloured bishops. But this bishop d4 shows this bishop's quite a menace, actually, this dark square bishop in this position. a4, we see b6, getting the pawns off the glare of the bishop here, putting them on dark squares, important. b3, we see rook e5, after rook d2, now h5. Okay, what's the idea of h5? Well, white wants to simplify again with rook e2, and the idea of h5 is revealed. It's basically to try and soften up white's king position. It's rather crude, but these things often work out quite well. So h4 is the idea, just to try and soften white's king side up, with maybe h3 coming up. And as soon as white plays a move like h3, you know, that diagonal is weaker for a start. So we see actually king h1, queen f4, and it's starting to look a bit menacing already. These dark square points in particular f2, g3, queen f6, queen d1. Now, for the moment, it looks a little bit too dangerous, and perhaps losing, to consider taking on f2 just here. It might be too dangerous in this position. Instead, Tal plays rook d8, but after bishop g4, in this position, Tal does play bishop takes f2, winning a second pawn. And it looks like 2 pawns up now because of a really dangerous idea, which I'm going to test if anyone's awake now. So after queen e2, which seems to be quite a bit of bother for black, what does black play here? So if I give you 20 seconds, can you see what black's next move is? So starting from now. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well done. Amazing. Someone's called it out. So anyone on? By the way, on Play Chess, if you hide the notation tab, that will help these guess the moves that I like to play. Now, if you sort of fought queen c6, that's not really good enough. Queen c6 is not good enough because of bishop f3, and then you really are losing that piece, and that's pretty painful. But this nice deflection tactic away from the queen protecting f3, and that's really bad for white, because now this is so much more effective. Queen takes d2 is queen c6 is so much more effective, meeting that for the white king without any bishop f3. So rook d2, crushing. White didn't even bother trying. No, pardon me. White did play the check. Pardon me. White played the check instead. King g7. Okay. Now the queen does protect c6 here, so we see g takes h4. Queen d4. Okay, hitting the bishop. Bishop moves back. Queen d3 hitting the rook, and also more importantly maybe queen f3 is threatened as well. Okay, and probably some other things. But after bishop g2, another threat is on that rook d1, and this is unable to be defended. This f1 point. Okay, and black. That's forced resignation here. Okay, and if you look at this game, if we look at it in overview and summary, so white resigned there, but we see that in the opposite coloured bishop and pawn ending, Tal just going for the king really, to use those dark squares around the opponent's king. So Averbakh had been betting on the opposite coloured bishops. That bet was no good. Subsequent analysis of this game, there's lines with bishop g3, and maybe Tal's sack is a little bit on the dodgy side after this piece sack here. Tal writes essential was bishop g3. Black was intending to play queen e7. That also, sorry, the state of the art theory after Tal's annotations, by the way, before we get into this, wasn't even the piece sack. The notes here after this game was played, and Tal wrote notes here. Theory on the line changed. Kolmov showed that after bishop g3, queen e7. Well, okay, let's look at this line. What he did show was after bishop g3, queen e7, bishop f3, rook a8. Well, this is Kolmov. Okay, he showed that 17, rook e1. White gets the advantage in all variations. Okay, so this was subsequently busted. Okay, this piece sack line, and in the light of that, actually, instead of taking on e4, queen e7 is mentioned with a satisfactory game. That's an editor's note. Queen e7. So okay, the sack was on this occasion a little bit unsound. Okay, in Tal's notes, he was a little bit more optimistic about the sacrifice. Basically, Tal 40 just had an active position after rook a8, so that a little bit of intuition to the sacrifice, but it worked out well in the game. So he took that risk, and Kolmov just sacked back the piece because he didn't want so many complications, and maybe he thought he'd just draw this. So what really changed for black to really increase the advantage here? I think this h5 is part of a dark square strategy to try and get some dark square weaknesses going. Okay, so f2 in particular, it's already causing a bit of a panic for king h1. So f2 is starting to be a tactical target. g3 definitely, white starting to panic a little, creating weaknesses. So maybe it's not the most solid play, and there's a tactical shot now. So bishop takes f2. We see rook d2. Okay, a neat finish though. So white played on a little bit more, but was basically busted here. So let's have a look at another game. Okay, so this is against Gurgenidze. I think he's Gurgenidze. I'm not pronouncing this correctly. Bukhuti, Eads, anyway. So anyway, e4 was played, and Tal used the Sicilian defence. And a little bit of a surprise coming up. So even back in 1958, apparently people played really obnoxious lines even back then. This is not a new thing for today. Bishop b5 check. Killjoy line. Bishop b5. And very good psychology against Tal, you'd think, surely. You wouldn't want to play the main lines. It seems every game we see of the main line Sicilian, Tal's winning as black. So why not try something like this? Very popular nowadays. Bishop b5. Bishop d7. I think nowadays just taking and c4 is an idea. But we see a4 in this game. Okay, so white potentially wants to have some a-file pressure and doesn't mind the double pawn. So knight c6, that is ignored. After castles, knight f6. Rook e1. So white is kind of maybe, you know, playing a kind of Ruy Lopez central plan. g6, c3, indeed. So all these ideas, 1958, unbelievable. You think this is modern? No. People were borrowing from the Ruy Lopez even back then against the Sicilian. So d4, white's constructing that centre. cd, knight takes d4. Looks a bit interesting to play knight takes d4. You'd think put both pawns together, but actually that wasn't played. Okay, so knight takes d4. What's the point of that? We see after castles, knight a3. Rook c8. Bishop g5. Okay. Now Tal plays a6, and he doesn't mind. I think he wouldn't have minded. Bishop takes. Hello, Chess explains that we've got an hi C. I hope C is okay. Nice to see him around. Okay, so I think Tal wouldn't have minded this bishop takes c6. He's getting more of the centre with b takes c6, and he can use this b file for operations. So we see knight c4. Okay, what's white doing here with the knights? Are they up to something? Is white up to e5 or something? Maybe e5 is on cards, but whatever. Tal just goes for R. Okay, I'm on Twitch. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so d5 is played here by Tal, kicking the knight, pesky knight. Bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6. Okay, so Tal has been given the two bishops. So is his opponent playing a huge psychological game here? First this bishop b5 line, and now giving Tal the bishop pair voluntarily. What is he doing? Is he trying to really confuse Tal here? No, he just takes on d5, okay, but the centre is under control. If you think about the central control of e5, it's quite good here for white. These knights seem quite happily perched, like a happy parrot on a stick in a cage. Sorry, but anyway, they're perched there, okay, and how can they be dislodged? So we see queen c7 trying to dislodge, and then f4. Where are these knights going? They're not going anywhere, are they? Are they? So, well, we see now rook b8. What can black do with the bishop pair? Okay, are we all going to overestimate this position? Because we know that modern engines, they always value the bishops so hugely. When you look at evaluations changing, it's often because someone loses the bishop. But here, okay, how do you exploit this, the bishop pair? Okay, so queen d2. We see the move rook b6. Okay, is there going to be a doubling of rooks on b2? And big deal, you know, maybe white plays b4. Maybe white can lock down the queen side, or we'll see free suffer later. Okay, we see rook e3, and now we see a5 from black. Maybe he was slightly concerned with a5. You can imagine white might have been keen at some point b4 and a5 himself. So a5 keeping a lock on white playing b4 as well. So trying to reduce white's pawn mobility over here. But b4 is played anyway, and it carries some risk now for this c3 point. Even though it's protected, we see Tal putting on the pressure now on c3 with rook c8, and of course he doesn't mind white taking here, that's no big deal. White is more interested in playing b5. Okay, so are these bishops useless here, or have they got potential? Well, funny enough, this bishop here, this light square bishop, is now tucked away on e8, which seems a miserable move in some respects to play, you might think. So what is going on for the moment? Actually, this is a really hard position maybe to evaluate. So what if I give everyone 20 seconds here? Do you actually prefer white or black if you were trying to evaluate this position? Who would you prefer playing here, white or black? Okay, so a lot of you seem to think white's got an easier game, and it looks visually, yeah, white looks to be doing well. I mean, especially this doesn't paint a picture of confidence, because it's kind of blocked in, hasn't got too much scope. This one, you know, there's a huge overprotection on e5. This e5 knight, this d4 doesn't seem to be going anywhere that fast. Okay, so queen d6 is played. Let's just see what happens then, which might not be an indication really of the position's merits, but let's see how it panned out. So queen d6, queen d1 is played, which tactically, okay, maybe if white wants to draw, he should really just hold on to any vulnerability perhaps. c3 is a bit looser. Where is this queen heading? It's heading now, it's evidence white's wanting pressure on d5 or some other maybe hack attack reason. But is he going to loosen his position? If he tries for an attack on black, is he somehow loosening his position here? And in fact, we see evidence of this immediately, that white is indeed loosening his position. Is he in self-destruct mode? In fact, it is clear he is, because after knight g4, this bishop's now all of a sudden got pressure along this diagonal, which is starting to be a bit dangerous. The bishop tucks away, and white definitely is showing self-destruct mode in this position. Didn't need to do any of this. The knight could have stayed perched maybe, but we see now f5, and now all of a sudden there's a tactical blow for black, which I think we can argue is not indicative of the strength of white's position earlier. Can you see the tactical blow here? If I give you 20 seconds now, what does black play in this position? Yeah, I mean, I think white was probably overexcited by the prospect of f6 and this pressure on e8. Got really quite excited to be attacking Tal. But this is the point where, you know, white's king is less safe because of rook takes c3. And now the tables are turning. So if white now takes on c3, there's bishop takes d4. And that's really unpleasant. So white plays now, tries f6, and we see rook takes e3, queen takes e3, and white can now just play bishop takes f6. So it's pretty bad. From what it was, it's a disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster, surely. White takes on f6, we see queen takes f6. Okay, white can't even take on e7 because of the knight, so knight goes back. That pawn's protected. 2 pawns up, thanks very much. Oh dear, it's a disaster game. Yes. White's probably kicking himself. Why didn't he just hold the position earlier, sort of going on for the attack? So maybe there's a lesson here. If you want to weaken your king, go for the attack sometimes, and that will weaken your own king. That's something to bear in mind. So queen d8. rook takes c8, queen takes c8, or 2 pawns up, queen going back to d8 here, which you might think strange actually. You might think, hold on a sec, what about something like queen c4? But maybe there's some danger here still lurks with queen here and knight here. So by keeping on a dark square, that might be more prudent. But also, pardon me, but also, of course, there's the threat of queen takes a5. So if we went queen c4, actually forget that plan. The real thing might be queen takes, and then maybe like this, it's dangerous, pardon me. So queen just goes to d8. Okay, h4. f6, keeping a knight out of g5 and maybe preparing the central thing. That's another benefit of queen e8, the pawn's protected. So we can aim for e5 here. Queen b6, that's nice, threatening e5. And now e5 comes. d4. Okay, bishop f7. h5, and actually it starts to get a little bit scary for Tal here. Or maybe, you know, maybe he's slightly concerned because he starts playing rather strange looking moves now. He plays king f8, believe it or not. King f8. I think there's some trouble brewing, believe it or not, in this position. Even though Tal is 2 pawns up, he plays king f8. If he played king g7, possibly queen c6 might be good, or queen c8 might threaten h6 check. Might threaten h6 check with the idea of queen f8. So maybe this is getting slightly dangerous, which might explain this next move, that king f8. So we see check, king e7, now knight d2, and now Tal takes that pawn, 3 pawns up. What is white getting for this? Bishop d5, knight g3. But this knight's a bit of a menace. Surely it has to be parrying that f5 square. Queen c5, check, with taking the pawn, check, check, check. Okay, check, queen c7. And things are starting to get a little bit easier now, because now white takes queens off and takes here. But this ending is nice for black still, even though just a pawn up. Potentially he can try and mop up this pawn, but this pawn might be an issue as well. So what he does first is play f5. So here, after knight g7, he doesn't want to lose f5, so he flicks in a check first and just plays f4 actually. So remember, he's still got in bishop b3 in reserve. So check, find a little trick from white, b6. So you can't take here because b7 and the game. But we see just bishop a6, check, knight e4, king d5, check, king c5. And with knight d7, actually, white resigned here. Probably it seems as though king d6, and that's the end of it for sure. Surely after king d6, end of it, end of game. So white resigned with his move apparently. So what do we get from that game? I think white could have maybe tried for a draw. He didn't have to go for this attack. He could have kept his knights perched there. So maybe maybe that's sometimes the case, that Tal's attacking opportunities are not from his own volition sometimes, but from the opponent's over optimism. It seems to be the case here that white had a good looking position. I mean, you know, like the way Ivanchuk once beat Kasparov with the knights versus the bishops. Kasparov had the bishop pair and lost brilliantly once to Ivanchuk. So two bishops don't always lose to two knights, especially if they're nicely like this, and one of the bishops or both are getting squeezed. White does have this squeeze on the queen's side, but just didn't hold steady. Went on for this quite ambitious plan really. of all this stuff. It's quite ambitious later, and this diagonal just turned out to be quite bad. So the way white played it, and black's just intensifying the pressure, of course, on c3 as well. But these knights have to voluntarily get out of the way, so it was helped by white. This whole thing was helped by white here. In this position now, the threat does seem to be rook takes c3. You know, could white have, for example, played king h1? Possibly, unless there's a knockout blow here. But maybe, you know, something like queen a3 is dangerous, potentially, in this position now. So white was on a self-destruct though, so f5, and we saw a self-destruct, and still some danger for Tal, but he was able to cope with the dangers. Okay, so the king came out, and we got this continuation with this ending. Not too many problems presented to black. This b pawn is not going anywhere really. Okay, so let's look at another game. So against now this probably is worth noting, this game. Okay, it's because Tal played an interesting thing here. He played the French defense, and he doesn't usually play the French defense. So let's see, Anatoly Bannik. So we saw a winnower variation with knight e7 here. Okay, so knight f3, queen c7. Okay, a4, and this reminds me that, I mean, Fischer used to play this plan often, try and get this bishop on this diagonal. So are black's dark squares weak? Can they be exploited? b6, maybe trying to get rid of the light square bishop, trying to exploit these light squares. But an interruption move, bishop b5 check. So bishop d7. So cutting across that plan, bishop d3. So knight comes to c6 here, and black's intending really to close up the position, so he's got no problems with castling or whatever. So he closes up the tension, which in one way that's good to kick the bishop, but and these dark squares are kind of more accessible. On the other hand, Tal's idea is to play f6 here. White just plays rook e1, and we see this menacing bishop on the diagonal. Okay, rook f7, bishop d6, queen goes to d8, bishop f1. White has a good grip on e5 here, and this bishop's a real pain, it would seem, at least visually. But knight f5 threatens it, kicks it away. We see f takes e5 now. Knight takes e5. Knight takes e5, rook takes e5, and white remains with this dark square grip. So can white intensify the pressure, or what about this pawn here though? Has this pawn just been sacrificed? No, e6 would be in exchange for that pawn. But actually that happens now. Bishop takes a4 is played. Rook takes e6. Queen d7. The rook goes back to e5. So who would you think's better in this position? If I gave you 20 seconds to have a look at this, so who would you prefer intuitively, white or black? Okay. So I think this was at the start of this tournament. I don't think Tal was that well actually, and in fact, yeah, he mentions his game against Korchnoi there's a mistake there. And so on page 70, if you've got the Life and Games of Mikhail Tal, he writes, you know, he was not his usual self. I didn't walk about at all, but all the time sat at my table, looking at the board with a melancholy gaze. I also played very limply. I got into a bad position. And then Bannik made a hash of things. Okay, the game became level, and I began to wonder whether I shouldn't try to win. I forgot about everything else, including my clock. Okay, so there's a bit about this game there. Let's carry on this game. So this is on page 70. There's a little bit of a story about this game. So this is at the start of the tournament. Tal, I don't think he wasn't his usual self. So usually he's walking around and stuff. Here he's not so cheerful. Okay, but he's playing this opening as well. He doesn't usually play. And there is a severe dark square grip at the moment, which maybe he's not used to. So Queen D8, Queen G4. White's got a certain amount of pressure. G3. Okay, White's got control of E5 as well. And Black can't really take away the rook from E5. But just exchanges off one pair of rooks. But White's got a really annoying grip here. And potentially this bishop might even be useful on this diagonal, as well as G2. Okay, so we see Knight D6 though, offering an exchange of queens. That's refused. Knight F5, Queen G5, Knight G7, and now we see H4 from White. So what's going on here? Rook F5, and another exchange of rooks. So this simplification now. And here Tal plays the move H5, which might seem okay. It seems, is that weakening? Is that weakening some more squares? Well, we'll see. Queen F6. Okay, so defending G6 now, but there's check, and now Queen B8. So A7 being attacked. That's defended. And now we see Bishop D6 and a horrible visitor on E5 now. This bishop perhaps coming to E5 would tie down the knight because of, you know, Queen H8. So A5, Bishop E5, bit of a bind here. It's being set up again. Is this passed pawn going to do anything? Knight E8. And also B6 is now taken for this passed pawn. So he didn't mind losing B6 for this pawn. Queen C5, but putting a lock on the dark squares rather again. This thing might be threatening Queen F8, King G8, defending F8. But in this position, we see a powerful move, a powerful looking move, Bishop A3, trying to get the queen away from C6. If C6 drops, then D5 and A4 will be double attacked. And that is the case. Queen takes H3, Queen takes C6. This looks pretty painful. All of these things are now attacked. King F7. It might be too dangerous though to take on D5 because of Queen E6. This pawn's still a runner. This bishop can't help against that pawn. So White has to be wary about that. So what he does here is play Queen B7 check. Okay, King F8. Now with the king on the dark square and away from Queen E6 is not possible, he now takes on D5. So if A3, we can simply play check and win that pawn. So it's pretty miserable now. Queen B5, Queen A8, check, winning another pawn. It's pretty painful, really. Tal's on the receiving end. D5. After A3, check. C4, and the bishop's now eyeing A1 as well. A2, the bishop blocks with bishop A1. After Queen A6, Queen D4. It's pretty bad. It's pretty hopeless, this position. After Knight F6, D6 cuts off the defense, and Tal's had enough. He had a difficult tournament at the start of this tournament, and he wasn't that well, but he started winning games soon after this. So it's not all gloom and doom. There's redemption coming up. Okay, but it was necessary to show you this game, just to show that even the great Tal was sometimes destroyed, as we showed last time. With the white pieces, he took a couple of losses, like against Kushnoi, which we saw last time. But maybe there wasn't really the usual kind of dynamism of the Sicilian defence here. Very much more closed position, with white having quite a powerful grip on the dark squares, and control of e5 in particular seemed very difficult to parry. The exchanges, maybe, you know, Tal was trying to relieve the pressure with all the exchanges, but you know, after Queen f6, okay, maybe there's a mistake coming up, Queen e6, but you know, if King h7, maybe Bishop f8 is unpleasant. So I know these are problems. So we saw this problem for this b8 pawn here, and a5. For the moment, that's immune. So when did that become a threat to take there? After Bishop e5, it's now threatened. So knight e8, Queen takes b6, and Tal's trying to make the most of his passed pawn, but it's not happening. Bishop h3 is a nice move, which starts to dismantle black, unfortunately. But so it's not all easy, this tournament for Tal, for sure. And by the way, it's been played in Riga, his hometown, as well. And the tournament is not just a USSR championship. It's an interzonal tournament. It's a qualifier for the World Championship. So there's two aspects to it. So we'll see in later rounds. In the final round, Spassky's playing. He needs to win against Tal in the final round to try and qualify for a World Championship candidate place. Tal's also trying to not just qualify, but for the World Championship, but obviously maintain his title that he won the year before. But this was a miserable first half for Tal, and this was a miserable game with black. But it's important to show this, I think. It's not all glory. So let's come to another game. So against Alexander Kotov, who wrote the book Think Like a Grandmaster. So Alexander Kotov did seem to be one of those grandmasters which didn't have very good results, sometimes totally disastrous results, and did seem to revamp himself magically, and maybe that was a good background for writing a book on how he did it. So Think Like a Grandmaster, like candidate moves and everything. But as white, he's playing positioning here, Alexander Kotov, using the fianchetto system against the King's Indian. So c6 is played by Tal here. Okay, after h3 we see Queen a5, not resolving the tension in the center just yet with something like ed, just Queen a5. Okay, in this position now Rook e1, and we see Rook e8, and now a3, as though the Queen might be harassed pretty soon as a possibility. So black now resolves the tension in the center with e takes d4, knight takes d4. Now knight e5, the c pawn is vulnerable here. Bishop drops back to protect it, but it's still picked on with a6 indirectly, because now potentially b5 to be annoying. Bishop d2, Queen b6. Okay, it looks as though black's been as annoying as possible, but is he actually threatening to take on b2? Probably not. It's probably losing on the spot to take on b2. to possibly the move knight a4 actually. Shall we just quickly check this out? Queen takes b2. If we play the move knight a4, I think the queen's trapped. Unless anyone wants to say otherwise. Okay, so Tal in this position, he does play an interesting controversial move in inverted commas. You might think black doesn't want to play this move structurally, but black does play c5. So he's voluntarily weakening d5 quite a lot. Okay, the knight goes back, protecting, shielding that b pawn, and now we see bishop e6 trying to compensate for the d5 weakness a bit and putting more pressure on c4 again. So the dynamic pressure, does it outweigh the strategic hole, Boleslavsky hole here? So knight d2, and again I don't think this can be taken to the knight a4. So we see knight c6, and now b4 using that pin. So it actually, isn't it going against black, this position? b4, there's a bit of a weakness of the last move with b4, which is pounced on. I wonder if you can guess. I'm not really sure it gives this black a clear advantage, but it might be worth a quick test. What do you think black plays in this position to try and exploit a kind of weakness of the last move? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. Okay. Okay, on play chess Pat MC, yeah. Knight g4. Yeah, okay. Okay. Knight g4. Just eyeing c3 here. And wanting to grab that dark square bishop. So white takes on g4. Okay, not minding bishop takes c3. Okay, so we see rook c1. Bishop drops back. Knight b3, putting more pressure again on c5. Rook ad8, defending indirectly because of this attack on the queen. Knight d2. Queen drops back now. Rook b1. Okay, I think Tal's position is quite good here now after knight e5, putting pressure on g4. Pardon me, g4. That's defended. And now we see the move b5. So it looks as though the worst is over for black. He's still picking on that poor c4 pawn all this time. C takes b, a takes b. And the bishop is protecting g4, and we get a swap here. Bishop takes b5 for the bishop takes g4 move. Bishop goes back again, and we see queen d7. White takes on g4. Knight takes g4. King g2. h5. It looks very, very pleasant for black. That white can't really take, you know, d2 pressure. There's maybe a threat of h4 now, h3. It looks pretty great for black on the surface. So bishop g5. Tal ignores that threat on his rook. He just counterattacks on f2 now with bishop d4. Okay, that's protected. And now f6 is played. The bishop's got to keep an eye, by the way, on e3, because otherwise bishop f2, we have knight e3. The bishop's got to keep an eye on e3 here. But bishop h4, there might even be g5 though, so bishop f4. But we see g5 in this position now. And white reacts with f3. It looks to be going bad for white. And he's losing the exchange here. This is the point, he's losing the exchange, in fact. because after knight f2, whoops, what does he do? He's just lost the exchange. Rook takes f2, bishop takes f2. Tal has just won the exchange. So much for Tal's d5 weakness. It wasn't an issue by the evidence of the game. So the exchange up now. It should be easier to play this position. Kotov doesn't mind the discovered check because he's got queen e3 here. But with the exchange up, Black's advantage is persisting here. c3 takes on e4, takes on f3, bit of a mop up really. Check. c2 hitting the knight. Knight c5. We see check, and a really neat move now to finish off the game. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 20 seconds starting from now, if anyone's still awake. Okay, yes, rook e1 is really powerful in this particular position. So because after rook takes e1, rook d1, pawn's queening, it's all over. If knight d3, just take on e1, and then, okay, so it's all over there. So okay, bit of a battle there, and we see the sources of counterplay for Black are often difficult in this fianchetto line. It seems as though Black's main strategy is to be a nuisance on the queen side. It's a very tactical strategy. White fundamentally has a solid position. You can't really go to attack the king in the fianchetto line. So it seems like a nuisance strategy involving c4 is the main feature. Because even a6, it's preparing to torture c4. Okay, but bishop d2, the queen is also subject to harassment. And to stop all the harassment, the price is paid of weakening d5. How many of you would voluntarily play the move c5 here? Would you think this is breaking all the rules that you've learned to play c5 in this position? If you were being honest, would you really play c5 in this position? The thing is, I think if you don't play c5, it's hard to see how Black can put pressure on White in this position. Okay, so we saw the move c5, seemingly a structural concession for that d5 square. So bishop e6, okay, knight c6, and the queen's still subject to harassment with b4. It's still being harassed, but tactically there's some weaknesses of the last move being picked up on. That c3 is a bit more vulnerable. So Kotov has gone a bit crazy maybe by playing b4. But did he need to play b4? Is it a case of another player just ruining a good position? I don't know. You know, so White's position here doesn't seem that great because look at Black's position. The rook's nice in the centre. The bishops have scope. It's difficult to see if White can really exploit d5. It doesn't seem to be an exploitable weakness. It's more of a technical, theoretical one. So, and g4 is of course a problem, but more so that b5 is potentially torturing c4 again, threatening to win a pawn. What else can White do now? White's in a passive state because of this. After b5, it's starting to get quite aggressive for Black. So he just goes in for this where he's weakening his king slightly. And you know, after h5, it's a characteristic move of many attacking players. You know, to play move h5, it's often weakening dark squares, causing havoc, and in this position it causes havoc. And again on f2, we saw in an earlier game how h5 later caused that havoc for f2. Isn't that a funny pattern? As soon as Tal plays h5, you know, you can expect white's king safety after the next few moves to be blown to bits. So bishop g5, weakness of the last move again. It was controlling d4. Tal just goes in for that. Bishop d4. Thank you very much. Give me d4. Was there time to take on d8? I think he didn't want to be mated. If he takes on d8 here, knight takes f2, threatens queen h3, doesn't it? As well as the queen. You can't go in for that. So thank you very much. Bishop d4. And he's winning the exchange. And that's it. White's just been obliterated. He's just the exchange down. He might as well resign in this continuation. I mean, does he want to play the really ugly bishop e3? No, not really. It's just, it looks absolutely hopeless to play bishop e3. This is not a position you want to play. Basically, it just looks too horrible. Okay, so he loses the exchange instead, but okay. And there's a neat move at the end here, which is nice. Okay, rook e1, accelerating his pass pawn. He's good with pass pawns as well, clearly. So let's have a look. Shall we continue? Shall we continue? Yes. Okay. In fact, there's only one more game, key game. So final round of the tournament against Boris Spassky. And there's an interesting photo available in a Chessville article for this tournament, which shows Tigran Petrosian. He's all dressed up with a suit and tie because he's expecting to win this USSR championship. Yeah, he's not expecting Tal to overtake him or anything. And so Boris Spassky needs to be. It's a must-win for both players. This final round of the USSR championship is a must-win for both players. Boris to be able to qualify for the world championship as a candidate, I think. So this is a classic encounter, and Boris kicks off with d4. And I must warn you, there's an adjournment in this game, and both teams had to be up the whole night for the next day. Okay, so we see the Nimza engine being played. So knight c3, bishop b4, and we see a3 from Boris. Quite forceful move, getting the bishop pair straight away. Okay, c5. Black's trying to close up the position to celebrate the knights, keep things closed, usually with stuff like this. Whoops, d6 and e5. So we see e3, knight c6. After bishop d3, no need perhaps for d6, just e5. Okay, white can't clearly play knight f3 by the way because of e4, full key pieces, so he plays knight e2. And he invites black to, Boris is inviting e4. Is the pawn going to be weak? Well, Mikhail plays this anyway, he plays e4. Is the pawn overextended or not? Bishop drops back. You might think it's subject to undermining with an actual f3 pretty soon. So is this a bit dodgy for black? Well, okay, we see b6 in this position, and all of a sudden, you know, c4 might be an issue, like this, for example. c4 might be an issue. So knight g3, and we see bishop a6. Counterplay. f3 is indeed played. Bishop takes c4. And now actually Boris plays knight f5, prompting black to castle to sort of defend, and well, is also threatening, of course, knight d6 check to win the bishop. So black castles. Instead of taking on e4, white takes the opportunity to actually play knight d6 in this position, attacking the bishop. And Tal now plays bishop d3, trying to get rid of white's better bishop at the moment, this light square one. Okay, so an exchange on d3. Okay, then we see c takes d4, c takes d4. And I'll try and get some notes up for this game actually. Let's see what Tal might have mentioned. So in this position, actually knight e8 is played, and Tal gives that an exclamation mark, saying now white has to make a decision either to exchange on e8 when he will have no initiative at all on the king's side, or else retreat to f5. So in his opinion, knight f5 was basically the most dynamic aggressive option, and that's the one Spassky chooses. He plays knight f5. Okay, so d5 now is played by black. Now a4, and it looks as though, hold on a sec, this diagonal is going to be pretty dangerous, surely. Okay. Knight d6. And in this position, what is going on? Okay, knight d6. Now knight takes d6. Tal writes, not of course bishop a3, because knight takes f5, bishop takes f8, we have queen g5 in this position with very strong threats for black. Okay, so not bishop takes f8, not this plan bishop a3, but knight takes d6. Okay, queen takes d6. Now bishop a3, prompting knight b4 is forced to avoid losing the exchange, reinforcing b4. Okay, now rook fc8, rook ac1. Now in this position, Tal offered a draw, and he had a particular variation in mind. So his variation he had in mind here was actually queen e6. Well, what was played? Queen e6. Well, queen e6. Because e3's been counterattacked here. Bishop takes b4. A takes b4, king f2 protecting e3, really threatening b4, queen d6 protecting the pawn again, and this kind of repetition. Which I've just messed up all the analysis. Great. Okay, so wait, promote variation, promote variation. Okay, so this kind of repetition to e6 and b4. Okay, so in the game what happened was, after this knight b4, we saw bishop takes b4, a takes, this happened, king f2, queen d6, but now actually Spassky avoided what Tal had thought. He played the move h3, just defending h2 like that, so playing on. But Tal thinks that he did a major blunder in this position. He should have really played in this position. I wonder if you can spot what Tal thought would be good for getting an initiative in this position. His next move he doesn't like at all. He gives himself a question mark, very interestingly. So what do you think is good for black in this position? If I give you 20 seconds, what would you play here? No, not b5, not b5. Although b5, I like the idea, I really do, but no, the rook kind of committed though. It's not b5. Anything else? If we think about dark square counterplay, is that a clue? If I told you dark square counterplay, how can you get it? We've seen two example games this evening already where dark square counterplay seems to be involved with a certain move. And so what would you play as black in this position? Yeah. Okay. H5 Tal's mentioning. and he thinks his prospects are good. And I think maybe it's because of h4 marking out g3. Okay, but no, Tal gives himself a question mark with this next move. He played actually king f8, and basically he criticizes this as being a routine move. The king moves towards the centre, but in some cases white will be able to capture the b pawn with check, while the h pawn is left undefended. Okay, the h pawn is left undefended. So we see rook c2 now from white, which is given as a strong move. White prepares to smoke out black from the c file, exploiting the unfortunate position of the black king. Okay, so we see rook takes c2 check, queen takes c2, attacking h7, forcing black to lose the tempo now with g6. Rook c1 dominating that c file, so it's a miserable position for Tal. Maybe justifying, Spassky's refusal of the draw. Okay, so queen d7. Okay, queen c6, just dominating that c file. So black really is, it seems to be black's really in difficulties here, having to defend awkwardly with rook a6. But Tal writes he could have got a draw here if he had played the more accurate move in this position, to play rook takes a4. He didn't think that was too bad. For example, rook takes a4 here, rook takes b6, just king e7, and in this position it should really be a draw. Most probably the game, in Tal's words, would have been drawn, whereas now the struggle flares up with renewed strength. So what did Tal do to mess this up now? Okay, after a5, Tal decided to play b3, so we get this dynamic continuation instead. A takes b. Okay, b2, b7. Both sides are queening. Queen, check. Now white queens. So the game's flared up again with the new queens on the board. There was a tactical possibility, should point out here, by the way. On move 33 here, we saw a takes b6. If rook c3 had been played in this position, b2, rook b3, b takes a5, rook takes b2, a4, rook a2, a3, the ending's still a draw. Okay, according to Tal. So anyway, we get this position now with queens emerging, and the fight continues. Okay, so move 36. Rook a2 check. King g3 check. King h2. Queen takes e3. Hang on, I'll just point out though that actually on king h2 here, you see if white had played king f4 in this position, rook takes g2. I think that's given a strong move. Queen g3 is threatened, for example. I think there's no problem for the black king here. So okay, so we saw the move king h2 here, holding on to g2. Queen takes e3. Now we see check. King f6. And Tal actually gives king h6 as a preference. I think both players were quite tense. This is approaching move 40. I think the first time control. But king h6, if we go with this, queen f8 check, king h5, queen takes f7, Tal would have in this position a perpetual check. He's got rook takes g2 with a perpetual check. Okay, so anyway, so we see king f6 check, queen e6 check, queen f5 check, queen e6. Now queen g3, queen e3, h4. And now a move which is given as a strong move in this position. Tal centralizes the rook with rook e2. You might think he writes about the tempting rook a1 to just try and get queen g1. Let's check this out. If rook a1, which seems tempting, what would happen? Rook a1, we'd have check, queen e6, check, queen f5, and in this position, I can't believe this, but it seems white has time for an attacking move in this position. Can you spot it? So if I give you 20 seconds here, what attacking move exists for white in this position? White's queen's attacked. Anyone? Come on, attacking move for white. What would you play here for white? Come on. Okay. Queen h6 here. Queen h6, yes. Come on, play chess. Found that queen h6. You're threatening queen g7. There's no nuisance checks here. This pawn covers e5. This would be quite dangerous for black. So that tempting rook a1 would have just lost, wouldn't it? If Tal had played rook a1 in this position, he'd be losing to that. Okay. So he played actually the strong move rook e2, and we see check, queen e6, and actually at this point the game was adjourned. And there's quite there's a bit of background information about this adjournment. For example, one of Tal's assistants fell asleep at 5 in the morning, and so it wasn't an all-nighter. And Spassky, he usually dresses up in a suit, but he was wrecked, after, and on the resumption, he came in looking wrecked and dishevelled, and he wasn't his usual self. Okay, and play resumed here after adjournment to the next day. So queen f4 check, the strongest move. He didn't want to get a rook and pawn ending. If he had gone with queen d8 check, so this had to be looked at night. Queen e7, rook e8. We'll go with this. Rook d2 takes, check. There's f5 here, and this should be nothing to gain here. So let's go back. So he went with queen f4 check, result of all night analysis. Queen f5, queen h6, still looks dangerous here. Queen h6 for queen g7s. We see king e7, the king's making a run for it. Queen f8 check, king f6, queen g7, king e7. And now a strong move, in Tal's notes at least, we see the move rook a8, which is given an exclamation mark. White forces the enemy pieces to retreat in view of the threat of rook a7 check. Black's next move is apparently virtually forced. So in this position, Tal's forced to, it seems, play the move queen d7. It's starting to look quite scary for black. Check, king f6, check, rook e6, check, King e7, rook a8 now. Rook e1. Okay. Now here we see the move King g3 being played, which I believe might be a mistake. But possibly this is a key mistake. Black's next move here seems quite strong. It's h5. He's avoiding the checking possibilities. So for example, if black went on a check rampage here with queen c7, let's have a look at this. King f2, check, takes, check, 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 check. King g8, and in Tal's notes, with the move, the game, black prepares a refuge for his king on f5. So here, that's a disaster for obviously white to rook up here. So there's a temptation to go for those checks, but it's not a draw. So that's why actually h5 is given as a strong move. Exclamation mark from Tal in his notes. So we see king f2 in this position. Yeah? The rook goes back to e6. And now another strong move is played, apparently, rook c8. Now black can only move his rook. The queen is tied down to the fence of d5 and e8 in this position. So, okay, the only thing that can move is the rook. Because if you try something like queen b6, let's just try it for sake of argument. Check, pardon me, check, and this one just wins the queen. Okay, so you can only move the rook. So rook d6 was played, and more checks. Queen f8 check. Okay, rook e8, rook e6, check, and the king now goes to f5. Queen h6, threatening to mate here with queen g5. The king goes to f6. Okay, queen h8 check. King f5. You might think, hold on a sec, in this position could white win a pawn? So if he tries rook d8, this is a tactical little trick, because, well, if takes, we've got queen g5 winning the queen, so that rook is immune here. Little tactical trick. If queen c6, we have check, and we can take on d5, but this is no problem, this position, because black can get the initiative with queen c2 check, queen c7 check, and now in this position queen f4, and it will be black having the initiative. Okay, this is really dangerous for h4, and if g3 we've got queen d2, so that has to be avoided, winning that pawn like that. So if we go back to this position, we see actually, instead of rook d8, we see the move queen h8 check, king f5, and here white should have settled for a draw apparently, since his attacks petered out. Okay, but we see instead rook d8, queen c6. Okay, Now apparently this is more accurate than Queen B5. If Queen B5, let's go with the notes here. King G3, Rook E2, King H3 with the threat of G4 check, but now black gets well, that's not good, because G4 check is really dangerous in this position. So forget Queen B5. That's why Queen B5 is not a good idea. So Queen C6 is better. Queen C6. And here Spassky finally, this is a huge game really. Spassky finally blunders on move 64. So move 64 now. This is a clear blunder. Apparently, he plays Rook C8 here. So he should have played apparently King G3, but no, he plays Rook C8. Okay, and we see now Queen A6, focal point of E2 here, and it's slightly different. King G3 check, King H3. Now it seems as though surely, well, white might be threatening G4, you might think, but no. Black plays now Rook E1, threatening the really nasty Rook H1 check, and Spassky actually plays G3 in this position. He can't play G4 check. Let's have a look. G4 check. We have HG, FG, and King F4, and this is really bad for white surely. Check, King E4, check, King F3, and now look, there's a mate threat on G3. White's run out of checks. The black king is mating the white king here, so G4 in this line doesn't help white. Would you agree? White is defenseless here because the threat of Queen G3. So if we go back, so Spassky is having to play G3 here. Okay, and now we see Rook G1 threatening mate on the spot. Okay, and F4 is played, defending that. Rook E1, threatening to transfer the queen to E6 now, and then, for example, you know, there'll be discovered check possibilities, and then penetrate into the enemy camp. Now, the only defense here apparently was Rook E8. The move Rook E8 was apparently the only defense. But even in this line, black could just take and take on and play Queen E6 with a clear advantage now. But that wasn't played. Rook E8 wasn't played. Instead, we see Rook C2, and now Queen E6. And look how the tables have turned on white's king here. Rook F2. There wasn't anything much better than Rook F2, because if Queen C8, for example, we can just take here and play Rook E4. We're winning that D pawn, so that doesn't help. Okay. So we saw Rook F2. We see check now with the Rook. Queen E4, Rook F3, and a really crushing move on the light squares. How many of you are still awake? What does the Tal play in this position? If I give you 20 seconds, starting from now. Anyone? No, not rook g1. Not rook g1. Come on. Attacking move. Attacking move here. You've got an opportunity. Attacking move. This is king g4. You can play king g4 here. Okay, so you know, this is really too dangerous now. After king g4. White tries check, and now after f5, Spassky finally resigns. He's getting mated, isn't he, with this king's visit. If he had played on here, well, first of all, if he plays queen c3 in this position, then we would have rook f1 is winning. Okay, that ending is winning. It's just clearly hopeless because the king's just mopping up the pawns here. And if we take here, it's equally hopeless, isn't it? We just take, and then here it's just like mating. So it was a really intense battle, and the story after is also interesting. Everyone was like cheering, and apparently, you know, Spassky, he goes outside to the street and he starts crying apparently, and it's like the second time he's been crying since this Simmel. The last time he had cried was losing a Simmel game versus Smyslov, I think. It was Tal writes, even though it was a really critical game, it's at this point that Spassky and Tal become friends. Really dramatic game. All the stakes are there in this game, and you know, Tal, you know, once he got that initiative and he was off the draw, he refused because obviously he felt compelled to try and win. And actually there was also this lightning tournament going on which he was tempted to go and play in. I think that's 5-minute chess. So, but no, he felt morally obliged once he got the opportunity to have to try and grind out the win. So it was an intensely important game, hence I was keen to show a lot of variations here between, you know, two of the most attacking dynamic world champions to come out of Russia. So, you know, it's a really classic encounter. I'm not, shall we, I don't know if we should go over it a quick second pass, but there was a lot of variations here. I wonder if I'm just going to paste, if I can just paste the PGN, or maybe not. Okay, let's just go over it. So it was a very, very intense game last round, and so with this win also Spassky was half a point ahead of Petrosian, so he won by half a point. Petrosian had dressed up fully expecting he was going to win this tournament, but he wasn't. He was pipped at the post because of this final round, this win. So a hugely intense game, which could have had an easy to play rook and pawn ending, but no, we had instead both sides promoting their pawns, and you know, hugely complex positions instead. So all of this could have been avoided with the move in this position after A takes B. Okay, rook c3 would have been simplifying, but we get this intense game now renewed with both sides threatening each other's kings, and just some slight slip-ups. Very accurate play from Tal to avoid very tempting continuations, and White should have accepted a draw at a certain point, but I think the overnight adjournment may have affected Spassky to be slightly overly optimistic, not too objective, trying to will the results. One of Ralston's 7 deadly sins was about not trying to play the position objectively, but wanting a certain result can cause a lot of blunders sometimes. So he wanted so desperately to win this game, and yeah, he was really upset about it after. But Tal played very, very accurately really. I mean, queen c6 instead of queen b5, for example. Okay, and now the tables were turning here, finally, where white's king is in serious trouble in this position. With the weakening of the light squares, this king is always marching in. Now, this f4 is a major compromise. So we see white's king is now in trouble. So check, and king g4, f5, and that's it. Okay, I hope you got something from this session. It's a bit longer than usual. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube when I upload it to YouTube. Thanks very much, and see you next week.